Welcome to the sixth episode of our podcast. Today we want to discuss the FDI law in India and demystify what it's all about. Let's jump into it. Okay, now, FDI might sound kind of boring, but stick with me here. It's actually pretty interesting. FDI is basically like, imagine you have this awesome lemonade stand, right? And you want to expand, make it even better. So you ask a friend to invest some money, they get a share of the profits, and maybe they even share some super secret lemonade recipes. That's kind of like FDI, a way to bring in outside money and expertise, but on a much bigger scale, of course. So where do we even begin with something as big as FDI in India?
Well, I think a good place to start is with the Foreign Exchange Management Act of 1999. That's the main law that controls how FDI works in India. It's there to make sure foreign investment helps India's economy, but also protects India's interests. It's like a balancing act.
So like a gatekeeper, deciding who gets to enter and what they can bring.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. Now, when it comes to actually investing in India, there are two main ways to do it: the automatic route and the government route.
Two different routes, huh?
Yep.
So tell me more about the automatic route.
That's the easy one. No need to get special permission from the government. You just follow the rules and invest. This route is mostly for sectors where India really wants foreign investment, like manufacturing.
Oh, so if a company wants to open a factory in India, that's the automatic route.
Often, yes.
Yeah,
Especially if they're planning to, make it in India.
I see. Makes sense.
Yeah.
And what about this government route? What's that about?
So that's where things get a little more involved. You need the government's approval before you can invest. This is for sectors that are considered, let's say, more sensitive.
Sensitive, how so?
Well, think of things like defense, telecom, media.
Okay, I see. National security and all that.
Exactly. These are really important sectors for India. So the government wants to make sure everything's done right.
It's like they're being extra careful with those areas.
Yeah, you could say that.
And apart from these two routes, there's also something called sectoral caps, right?
Right. Those are limits on how much a foreign company can own in certain industries.
So even if you go through the automatic route or the government route, there might be a limit on your ownership.
Yeah, sometimes.
Why is that?
Well, it's another way to make sure Indian companies aren't pushed out.
So it's about striking a balance
Mm.
between welcoming foreign investment and protecting local businesses. It sounds like a delicate dance.
It really is.
And it's not just about getting the money in, right? There are rules about transparency and compliance, too.
Absolutely. India wants to make sure the money is coming in legally and that everything's above board.
So no funny business allowed.
Nope, not at all. Companies that get FDI have to report to the Reserve Bank of India. They have to follow all the rules, and they have to keep their records clean.
That makes sense. It's like a way to keep everyone honest.
Exactly.
Now, I know we made some big changes to the FDI rules recently.
Yes, in August 2024.
So this deep dive is actually really timely then.
Absolutely. These changes are all about making India even more attractive to foreign investors and dealing with some of the, new stuff happening in the global economy.
Okay, I'm all ears. What are some of the key changes that stand out?
Well, one of the biggest ones is simplifying cross-border share swaps. It makes mergers and acquisitions much easier, especially for Indian companies trying to grow internationally. Like imagine an Indian tech company. They want to buy a software company in Silicon Valley. These new rules make that process a lot smoother.
Wow, so it's like we're making moves on the global stage.
Definitely. Another big change is 100% FDI in white label ATMs.
White label ATMs.
Yeah, those are ATMs that aren't owned by banks.
Oh, I see.
This change could really help with financial inclusion, especially in rural areas where there aren't many banks.
So more ATMs mean more people have access to financial services.
Exactly.
And that can help boost the economy, especially in those areas.
Exactly.
That's a really positive impact. What about startups? I heard there were some changes for them too.
Yep. The new rules made the definition of a startup company clearer.
Why is that important?
Well, before, it was a bit unclear which companies actually qualified as startups. And that made it harder for them to get foreign funding.
So now it's more straightforward.
Exactly. It just makes things easier for everyone.
So India is basically saying, hey, we're open for business, especially if you're a startup with a good idea.
Yeah, pretty much.
Now, we can't talk about FDI without mentioning e-commerce, right?
Yeah.
It's a huge sector in India. But it also has its own special challenges when it comes to FDI.
Oh, definitely. E-commerce is a really interesting example of how India is trying to find that balance between attracting foreign investment and protecting local businesses.
Yeah, that's a tough one. How does it even work?
Well, FDI in e-commerce is different for B2B and B2C.
B2B and B2C.
Business to business and business to consumer.
Okay, got it.
For B2B e-commerce, it's pretty simple. 100% FDI is allowed, no problem.
So if a company wants to sell things online to other businesses, they're good to go.
Yep.
But B2C is a different story.
Yeah, B2C is more complicated. India is much more cautious about FDI in B2C e-commerce.
I bet that has something to do with protecting those small shops and markets, the ones that are everywhere in India.
You got it. Make sure those small businesses aren't pushed out. Keep things fair.
So what kind of rules are there for B2C e-commerce?
One big rule is that FDI isn't allowed in inventory-based models. Only marketplace models are allowed.
Can you explain that a little more? I'm not sure I follow.
Sure, think of it like this. You have a website that sells, I don't know, handmade jewelry.
Okay.
In an inventory-based model, you own all the jewelry, and you sell it directly to customers. But in a marketplace model, you're just a platform. You connect sellers with buyers.
So like Amazon and Flipkart.
Exactly. They're marketplace models.
Gotcha.
And even with marketplace models, there are extra rules. For example, a foreign company can't own more than 25% of any vendor on their platform.
So they can't control the vendors too much.
Right.
And they're not allowed to mess with the prices either.
Exactly. It's all about keeping things fair for everyone.
Wow, it's really complex.
Yeah, e-commerce is a tricky one.
You know, one thing that strikes me is how India's approach to FDI reflects its history.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a country that's always valued self-reliance, but it also knows it needs to be part of the global economy.
Yeah, it's like walking a tightrope, finding that balance.
Exactly. And you can really see that balancing act in how India is handling the whole digital economy boom.
Right.
We talked about e-commerce earlier, but there's also data localization, digital payments, even net neutrality. It's all connected.
It is.
It's like India's writing its own playbook
Yeah.
for this whole digital revolution.
Yeah, and they're doing it carefully, thinking about the impact on everyone.
On the whole country, not just a few big companies. So if we look at all this together, what does it tell us about India's economic strategy?
Well, I think it shows the Indian government really focused on growth, but growth that benefits everyone.
Inclusive growth, as they say.
Exactly. The government want to create a system that's fair, that helps local businesses thrive, but also welcomes foreign investment, as long as it's the right kind of investment.
The kind that aligns with India's goals.
Right.
So it's not just about making money, it's about building a better future for India.
I think that's a big part of it.
And it goes beyond just the economy, too. There's national security, technological independence, even cultural identity.
Yeah, it's all part of the mix.
It's like a giant puzzle. And FDI is just one piece.
A very important piece, though.
Absolutely. So with all that in mind, what do you think the future holds for FDI, especially with the digital economy growing so fast?
I think we'll see India keep refining its approach, tweaking the rules, trying to find that sweet spot.
Between attracting investment and protecting its own interests.
Exactly.
We might even see some completely new policies as the digital world keeps changing.
Oh, definitely. Things move so fast these days. You have to adapt.
And I think we'll also see the Indian government focus on attracting specific types of FDI.
Like what kind?
Investments in renewable energy, infrastructure, high-tech manufacturing.
Yeah, areas where India has a lot of potential.
Exactly. It's like India is saying, we're open for business, but on our terms.
I think that's a good way to put it.
And that's what makes India's FDI story so interesting.
It's a story that's still being written.
Exactly.
And it's definitely one worth watching.
For sure. All right, we're back. We've talked a lot about FDI in India, haven't we?
We have. Different ways to invest, sectoral caps, e-commerce. It's a lot to take in.
It is, but it's fascinating stuff. You know, we've talked about how India is trying to find that balance, attracting foreign investment, but also protecting local businesses. But what about the consumers? How does all this affect them?
That's a great point. We haven't really talked about that yet.
Right? I mean, think about it. FDI can bring in all these new products and services, more competition, maybe lower prices.
Yeah, that's definitely a possibility.
But on the other hand, what if foreign companies start to dominate? What happens to the local businesses then?
That's a risk, for sure.
And what about data privacy, cultural influence?
It's all important things to consider.
It's a complicated issue, no doubt.
It is.
So I want to leave our listeners with a question to think about. How do you feel about the impact of FDI on consumers? Is it mostly a good thing, more choices, better deals? Or are there downsides that worry you?
It's a question worth asking yourself, especially as India keeps moving forward in this globalized world. There's no easy answer.
Definitely not. Well, that about wraps up our deep dive into FDI in India. Thanks for joining us.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope you learned something new and maybe even have some new questions to ponder. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.